Welcome back. Really chaotic week one, everyone. And that includes upsets, that includes close games, and a lot of different things here. Now, what I want to... it's hard to even know where to start, really. You had Oregon in a dogfight with Idaho in the fourth quarter, which is insane, and that is something that we will talk about here. We had Michigan and Fresno State in a dogfight. Penn State blew the doors off of West Virginia. Georgia blew the doors off of Clemson. Oh, I know. Texas Tech only beat an FCS team by 1 and took them to overtime. Arizona and New Mexico scored like a combined 100 points on the final ranked game of week 1. It's just absolutely insane, really. And you look at it from a proper perspective, and we're only in week 1 of the 2024 season. There's a lot of concerns for a lot of teams, and I will tell you right here and now that out of all the teams that played yesterday, there are really only 2 teams that I think are elite, and maybe a handful more that are near elite or that can win the national championship. I think Georgia and Alabama are clearly a tier ahead of everyone else. And for now, just with all that Bama lost and all that Georgia returns, I would still put Alabama in a tier 1B, Georgia in a tier 1A. Everyone else at this point is in tier 2 or lower based off of week 1's performance. Of course, it's only week 1. Many of these teams played inferior competition. I know teams like Georgia, Penn State, you look at Notre Dame, and you look at Miami. They played competent schools. USC and LSU will play each other in a matchup that means significantly more than 90% of the games that we watched. And by means more, I mean in relative to knowing how good they actually are with reasonable expectations. Like New Mexico beating Arizona would have been insane, and that's not necessarily a gauge of how good New Mexico is, because, well, they lost to an FCS team in week 0, and a group of 5 team upsetting a power 4 team is rare, goes beyond the expectations of that team, for example. So there's not much to take away. So we're going to be doing overreactions here on this channel throughout these next few weeks. And then as we get into October and November, it's going to be more about which teams do we believe in on college football with Sam, or more so I believe, can win the national championship, realistically. Who has a good chance, teams that could if some things go their way, but probably won't, and then we won't even talk about the teams who cannot. In that segment, of course, there are teams that won't be able to win the national championship that we'll talk about here often. But week 1 reactions, Big Ten discussion, and Georgia's beatdown, that's what we're going to be talking about here. I want to get into this and start off with Georgia's destruction of Clemson, and then we'll go into the order in which all the games we'll be discussing occurred. So what Georgia did against Clemson was impressive for a number of reasons. The Georgia Bulldogs beat the Clemson Tigers 34-3. A 31-point victory. Now, Josh Pate, on his show, formerly known as Late Kick, now it is the Josh Pate's College Football Show. He changed the name, got a new logo. Very impressive. Josh Pate always talks about talent. That's what he loves to talk about. And how recruiting is so important to the game, and it is. But you watch this game, and I will tell you what this game shows. This game shows you, it shows the whole college football world, that recruiting doesn't matter if you can't develop, if you can't coach, if you can't scheme. Clemson has a top 10 talent roster. They do. You know what they did with it? Nothing. You may say they have not recruited top 10 classes in 3 years, and I will give you the fact that they have a 5-star quarterback in Cade Klubnik, who is no better than Michigan's Davis Warren or Alex Orji, who were walk-ons or 3 stars out of high school and did not look good in Michigan's performance against Fresno State. That is what Clemson has at quarterback. A 5-star who plays like a walk-on and who can't do anything whatsoever with Matt Luke coaching talented offensive linemen, with tight ends and wide receivers who aren't great, but they aren't bad either, and I would argue they're good, and with a defense that's one of the nation's best and is much better recruited than the offense, by the way. The defense is one of the better recruited positions in all of the country. Can't do anything. Only scored 3 points. Only had 189 total yards. Had 1 turnover, a pick by Cade Klubnik. They ran for 2.1 yards per carry. Georgia only had 2 sacks, by the way, and 6 TFLs. It's not like they had 10 sacks, and that's the only reason why the rushing numbers were bad. Georgia owned Clemson. They owned them. I mean, Kirby Smart, I used this analogy the other day. What Kirby Smart did is he took Dabo Swinney and the entire Clemson program, like Bane took Batman in DC Comics, and he broke his back into 1,000 pieces and left him for dead on the street. That game was disgusting, especially when you factor in that Georgia was only up 6-0 at halftime and started off rather sluggish, clearly missing a player like Brock Bowers, Darnell Washington, the dominant tight ends that they had in 21, 22, and 23, mainly with Bowers there. Oscar Delp is a great tight end. He's one of the nation's best, but Bowers was a unicorn. It's like Ohio State with Marvin Harrison Jr. gone. You saw that in their Week 1 game. They do miss that type of player. Georgia, it'll take them time to adjust. But London Humphreys stepped up. Arian Smith stepped up. Nate Frazier at running back stepped up. And Carson Beck did well. And we'll talk about all of these players throughout analyzing and breaking down this game. But I really want to drive forward that point that recruiting sometimes, especially when you have a staff that doesn't adapt, that is obtuse, that is stiff, what recruiting is can be getting gold paint and spray painting like a dried turd on the side of the road or a dead animal carcass on the highway, and you're spray painting it with gold and saying, look, it's a golden sculpture of, well, something, but it's gold. It's like, no, it's not. In fact, because of how bad the coaching is, there isn't even potential there. In order to access that potential, you need to throw it all out and bring someone new in. And maybe that's me being harsh on Clemson, but I like what Joe DeLeon said on his show, the Ruffino and Joe show. I actually think it was Blake Ruffino who said this. Dabo Swinney is, right now, Les Miles or Mark D'Antonio in the later years at their 10 years at LSU and Michigan State. Right now, this team is a waste of talent. They have top 10 talent with no offense and a defense that is near elite or elite, but doesn't develop as well as Iowa or Ohio State or Michigan or Georgia. Like they even could be better on defense despite how good they are. And the defense is not an area that I'm going to be criticizing much, but that offense is horrible. It's absolutely atrocious, and it has to be fixed. And Garrett Riley's in his second year, and they come out and they look the way they did against the Georgia Bulldogs. Number 14 team in the country loses to the number 1 team in the nation by 31 points, and it was with the number 1 team in the country playing a very sloppy game. Not impressive whatsoever. I don't think that right now Dabo Swinney's even a top 25 head coach. I don't think that. Not one bit. A top 25 head coach, Lance Leipold, Chris Kleiman, Mike Gundy. I would say James Franklin. I would say definitely Ryan Day, Jonathan Smith, Kyle Whittingham, Kalen DeBoer, Kirby Smart, Dan Lanning, Luke Fickell. Look at Hugh Freeze at Auburn, Mark Stoops at Kentucky, Jeff Brom at Louisville, Mike Norvell at Florida State, even with the issues they have. So many coaches could do infinitely better with this talent. And because of Dabo Swinney's stubbornness, because of, let's call it what it is, his pride and his ego, Clemson is not going to go anywhere. Heck, they could win the ACC. But if they win the ACC, that's more of an indictment to how bad the conference is and how weak that conference is, rather than him being an elite head coach. He is not the coach that he was in the mid-late 2010s. He's not. The game at this point has passed him by. Period. Amen. And that's the Clemson angle. The Georgia angle is Kirby Smart is the best coach in the country. He has one of the best staffs in the country, and he has the best team in the country. And out of all 130-something FBS teams, number grows every year. Soon it will shrink because I guarantee you the Power 4 and Group of 5 in the next decade or few decades will split apart, sadly. But it'll probably happen. Out of all 130-plus FBS teams, there's only one team I think right now who could beat Georgia. The other team in the preseason who I thought had a decent chance against Georgia because of all their athletes and the fact that they theoretically had depth at every position and a limitless ceiling at every position was Oregon. But Oregon looked terrible against Idaho. Alabama's the only other team who I think right now could beat this Georgia team. That's it. Georgia, Bama. It's exactly how it was in 2021 when they played for the national championship. Same thing in 2017. And in 2022, some would argue that Alabama was better than Ohio State and Michigan that year. I disagree, but they never matched up with each other, and Alabama lost 2 games in the regular season. But the Bulldogs are the number 1 team out of those top 2, in my mind. And they put up 34 points and 447 yards on what will probably be a top 10, top 15 defense. At very worst, a top 25 defense. That's losing their center, Cedric Van Pran, NFL player. Amarius Mims, their tackle, NFL player, first rounder. Their tight end, Brock Bowers, first rounder, NFL player. And that's with Trevor Etienne being out and them losing their top backs from last season. A lot of change on that offense in specific areas, and their key portal addition on offense couldn't play. He was suspended for a game. And they came out and they mauled Clemson. They killed them. They murdered them in front of the entire world to see. And Clemson couldn't do anything about it. They were helpless out there, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that after this game, it's as clear as day that if there's any team who can compete potentially with this team, it's Alabama. We'll see what they do to each other in Week 5 when they match up. That's a game that I will definitely be previewing on here, even though we are primarily a Big Ten channel. And look, guys, I don't want to say that it's a lock that this team is going to win the national championship because it's way too early. But that would be one of my bolder overreactions, for entertainment purposes mostly. But I think there may be some grain of truth to it. I mean, you look at ESPN's FPI, Alabama and Georgia are in the top, Alabama and Texas, rather, are in the top 3 with Georgia. And then there's a significant drop-off to number 4, Ohio State. And I think Texas and Alabama, along with Ohio State and Penn State, Notre Dame, and the teams that are below in FPI, have more questions both on their roster and coaching staff than Kirby Smart does at Georgia. He's been with the Bulldogs for nearly a decade. He's stacked elite recruiting classes on top of elite recruiting classes, and he develops them well. Georgia right now is the nation's best program. They have a 43-2 record since the beginning of the 2021 season, and the 2 of their losses came to Alabama teams who were in the college football playoff and top 6, top 5 teams that year. 2021 Alabama was certainly the second best team in the country. 2023 Alabama, not the second best team in the country, but they got better as the year went on, and you can never count out Nick Saban. Those only 2 losses are to a coach who retired because he himself made the conscious decision and did not have the the enormous pride and ego to remain in a college football world that he didn't think he could tackle to perfection. That's how you know Nick Saban's not just a good coach, but also a good and wise man. The MVP of this game is running back Nate Frazier. Now, I didn't find a picture for Nate Frazier that I could appropriately Photoshop to fit him in on the right square with the Georgia logo that's on your screen. But I'd mention him anyway because as a true freshman coming in with 11 attempts, 83 rushing yards, and a touchdown, he had himself an absolute day. And I admire players who can step up and who can face adversity and who just come out there and ball. And that is what Nate Frazier did. Nate Frazier had, again, 83 yards rushing on 11 carries, a touchdown. He averaged over 7 yards per carry with a long of 40. And they just continued to run him and do well with him. And he'll find himself in the rotation along with Trevor Etienne after performing well against a defensive line in Clemson that includes Peter Woods and TJ Parker. Peter Woods had a sack, 2.5 TFLs, and he was getting pressure, doing well in the run game and the pass game. And Clemson's defense, again, is a great unit. But Nate Frazier did his job. He excelled. And even when you take out that 40-yard run, it's still 10 carries for 43 yards, averaging about 4 yards per pop, and he had a touchdown. So he can break away and get big gains, but he can also be consistent on the ground in a running back room that lacked Trevor Etienne. And they needed Etienne this year because they lost. It wasn't, I forget exactly who they lost, pardon me, but 2 good running backs, one of them being Dejon Edwards, the other one, his name escapes me. I don't think it was Kendall Milton. Maybe it was. I actually think it was, but I don't know. Correct me in the comments. I happily accept correction. Carson Beck, 23 of 33 for 278 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also 19 yards scrambling. You could include him up here in that MVP conversation. I thought Peyton Woodring, 55-yarder. And when it happened, I called that he would make it. I was at work, and some coworkers are saying, this is insane. Will he make it? And I'm thinking, yeah, Peyton Woodring is a pretty good kicker. I think he's an All-American caliber kicker. He should make this. And lo and behold, he did. And he had some extra leg to go along with it. He put up the 2 field goals in the first half for Georgia that gave them a significant enough lead over Clemson to where, let's say, the offensive struggles continued in that second half. Well, again, Clemson only scored 3 points, and Georgia's defense was on point, and they probably, even with struggles that they had, Georgia just has enough talent on offense to where they probably would have scored at least 1 touchdown if everything went in the worst possible way for the Bulldogs and Kirby Smart. So this is an absolutely impressive performance by Georgia. There's no question about it. I don't know if I'd call it the most impressive performance of Week 1 because I didn't even have Clemson ranked in my top 25. I don't even think they, from my view, would be power rated appropriately as a top 25 team. Meanwhile, I thought Georgia was power rated number 1 and fairly better than even the next best team behind them. So to me, a little bit sluggish to start off with on Georgia's end, but they finished strong, and that's what matters with a 31-point win when they were only favored by about 2 touchdowns. So it's certainly one of the more impressive performances to kick off the college football season, and that was with Georgia probably playing a B or maybe, dare I say it, C-plus level game, with Etienne being out and their offense adjusting rather early. A lot of questions for Clemson, some questions for Georgia, but I think those will more so be answered with time rather than with Clemson, where you don't know if the questions will be answered in a positive or negative way. Oh boy. Sorry that I had to just briefly scratch my nose there. If you can't tell, my nose is plugged. I am a little sick here, hoping that solves by tomorrow so we can hit the ground running for previews and predictions and also reacting to LSU USC, which I'll be reacting to tomorrow. I didn't include a preview and prediction for that, but with all of you being on here, all nearly 50 of you being on here, I'll tell you right now, I do think USC will win. Just so that it's on record, I want to say that I think USC will win. And that's because I think that USC will be more comfortable with their defense improving, but still being way far behind where a Big Ten defense typically is. Basically, USC is more comfortable playing in a shootout and relying on their quarterback and wide receiver play than a Brian Kelly team is. That's kind of what I'm thinking, especially with Mike Denbrock leaving for Notre Dame. So there's a change in staff, both offensively and defensively for LSU. And Garrett Nussmeier is a big downgrade from Jaden Daniels. Meanwhile, for USC, there's a big change on defense, like with LSU, but there's not much of a change on offense. And Lincoln Riley's the play caller, so he's still there. And Miller Moss, I think, is closer to Caleb Williams than Garrett Nussmeier is to Jaden Daniels. And I think USC's wide receivers are deeper and have a higher ceiling, particularly with Zachariah Branch, than LSU's receivers do. I'm also on record for saying that I think USC will struggle mightily in Big Ten play. And I don't know how that will pertain anymore. Like, I had them losing to Wisconsin at home. I don't think I'd pick them to lose to Wisconsin after what Wisconsin did against Western Michigan. And I still don't think that USC, even after week 1, is going to do super well in the Big Ten because they don't match up well, from what I understand and know, with much of the conference. But they can prove me wrong tonight. And there's a chance that they could outpace LSU, especially if Nussmeier is not ready to step up. But that's just my brief analysis and prediction for that game. Please, if you can, there's just a fly on my head there, please subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, like the video, and share it around to other college football fans because we are going to be going live every Sunday of the college football season, barring any disaster that happens. And typically we will also be live around 3 to 4 times a week. Definitely Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is the current schedule. If there are any changes, the shows will still typically be at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain West time, and I don't know, I think like 5 p.m. Pacific Time. You guys know the time zones for sure. And I'll always let you know if the shows are earlier or when any changes happen. So just like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so that you can get notified when we go live, because I know a lot of you are busy, a lot of you are working people, and therefore you don't always have the time to know when we're going to be going live or when others are going to go live. So that notification bell will be very useful. If you all have any questions you want to get to me, I will be answering super chats at the end of the stream. Thank you for your support, and let's resume. So after talking about Georgia's blowout of Clemson, I want to move on and talk about some Big Ten football. What did you all think of Big Ten football? I thought that Big Ten football was a little bit clunky in week 1. The only team that really impressed me in the Big Ten this week, if I'm being honest, was a combination of Maryland and Purdue, though they played teams that they should have beat anyway and beaten handily. And I would also say Penn State. Penn State was truly the most impressive team in my mind from week 1. And maybe there are other teams who were impressive, Nebraska as well, but Penn State really sticks out. Everyone else, for the most part, disappointed or just had kind of a meh or mediocre performance and just maybe met my expectations or did a little worse. If you ever see me swatting around during this video, there is a fly that I'm trying to take care of. I don't know why he's active right now, but it is what it is. Anyway, let's start off with North Carolina beating Minnesota. The final score, North Carolina 19, Minnesota 17. I looked at this game early, and I thought that I thought that Minnesota would win because of their superior special teams. They had a very good punter from last year and a very good kicker from last year return in Dragan Kesich and Mark Crawford. Crawford did well. Kesich, not so much. And North Carolina also did better both at punting and kicking than Minnesota did, and they did better returning their punts. That was really the story of this game, was special teams. Everything else that I predicted, outside of the fact that Darius Taylor was hurt and couldn't play, to a certain degree happened. I picked Minnesota to win this game 30-24. Well, North Carolina won 19-17. The offenses were a little worse, especially at quarterback for UNC, a little bit at quarterback too for Minnesota than I expected, though I think Minnesota's offensive problems more so stemmed from the offensive line and North Carolina's defensive line than Max Brosmer. But overall, it was a close game and a game that was decided by special teams. The difference is, unlike what I thought was going to happen, the special teams ultimately went in North Carolina's favor. The yardage was about equal. Overall, North Carolina, they had 105 passing yards. Minnesota had 166. North Carolina had 147 rushing yards. Minnesota had 78. That averages out to North Carolina having 252 total yards, Minnesota having 244 total yards. Both had a turnover. I think Minnesota's was a fumble, and North Carolina's was an interception. Minnesota had 14 first downs. North Carolina had 18 first downs. And the Tar Heels only had a 1-2 possession advantage. You also look at third down conversions. North Carolina 8 of 16, Minnesota 4 of 12. But Minnesota was 1 of 1 on fourth down. North Carolina failed their sole fourth down attempt, which came at the beginning of the matchup in the first quarter. These teams are relatively equal. Obviously, with North Carolina winning on the road, neutral field, I'd probably pick North Carolina again. I know that Max Johnson went down, but he was more of a detriment to their offense in this game. Minnesota's defense really did improve. I do think North Carolina's did as well. Connor Harrell, he came in, went 2 of 4 for 34 yards, had a fumble, was a little loose with the football, but he probably provides higher upside anyway than Max Johnson is. You just wonder if he can be as consistent. Amari and Hampton had a really good game for North Carolina. Marcus Major had a good game for Minnesota. Ultimately, it just came down to the fact that North Carolina, I think, was more consistent overall in the trenches, and they had better special teams. That's really what it came down to. Minnesota, you look at just everything this game provides, and if they just make one of their field goals, they miss 2 of them, they win this game. Ceteris paribus, keep everything else constant. Minnesota wins if Kesich just doesn't hook one of those field goals. And that final field goal attempt was a little bit of poor coaching. They didn't center it enough on the run. And if they just centered it a yard or 2 yards more to the left, Kesich makes it, and Minnesota is 1-0 instead of 0-1 with a schedule where they have to play Michigan, they have to play USC, they have to play Penn State and Rutgers and Wisconsin. And Minnesota can still be, by the way, a good, great team. They have the pieces when healthy at running back and O-line and receiver to have a competent offense, and their defense looked really good. I know UNC took a step back on offense with Drake May leaving, but they have Amari and Hampton. They have Willie Lampkin. They have J.J. Jones and Kobe Paysour and other players. And they were held by Minnesota's defense, ultimately. So it came down to special teams. I can't say whether either of these teams is going to be top 25, if they're going to be good or not. I don't know, because it was so close, and these teams have so many questions as is entering 2024, and have almost even more questions after this game, with Max Johnson's tragic injury. Be praying for him, and Max Brosmer looking really like Ethan Kaliakmanis and Tanner Morgan did over the previous 3 years, and the offensive line allowing 5 sacks and 7 TFLs. I mean, both teams have a lot of questions, but I can tell you that they're pretty equal, and I do think that they have higher ceilings, perhaps, than many would say. But special teams matters. Do not forget that. A good kicker will win you games where maybe your opponent outplays you or they gain the upper hand. Minnesota was more efficient in the red zone, for example. I thought Minnesota's defense, just relative to talent and expectations, I did think that they were more consistent and overall did a better job than North Carolina's defense. And they had home field advantage. They scored 2 touchdowns to UNC's 1. But ultimately, North Carolina won because Mac Brown trusted Noah Burnett, who went 4 of 4 on field goals, long of 52, 1 of 1 on extra points, and scored him 13 points in total. And Tom McGinnis, 153 punt yards on 3 punts, averaged over 50 yards per punt, pinned Minnesota deep one time. Compare that to Dragon Kesich, who went 1 of 3 on field goals, 2 of 2 on extra points for 5 points, and Mark Crawford, who punted 5 times for 228 yards and averaged 45.6 yards per punt with 2 inside the 20. Well, there's your game right there, particularly at kicker. North Carolina had the superior special teams unit, and that's why they won this game on top of Amari and Hampton performing well and having over 100 rushing yards, plowing through people, jumping over people, and just being consistent despite not having a rushing touchdown or a big breakaway run. For Minnesota, I want to zoom in on the defense because I think the unit improved. They held North Carolina 252 yards. They held them despite ineptitude on the offensive side of the ball and their best player missing in Darius Taylor to 4 field goals. This defense last year, Minnesota's, would have probably lost the game to North Carolina by double digits, even with Max Johnson at quarterback, even with that injury and Connor Harrell. Because last year Minnesota could not stop the run. They in particular could not stop the pass. And there were some dropped passes by North Carolina. There were some errant throws by Max Johnson. But Minnesota played tight coverage. They hit hard. It looked like Joe Rossi's defenses of 2021 and 2022, not his defense of 2023. So I think Corey Heatherman has a good unit. Minnesota had 2 sacks and 6 tackles for loss, 4 passes deflected. Jaw Joyner, Danny Strigo, and Anthony Smith combined for the 2 sacks. And Cody Lindenberg, Maverick Baranowski, Jaw Joyner, Danny Strigo, Ethan Robinson, incoming corner, and Anthony Smith combined for the 6 TFLs. And they had 73 total tackles. I mean, Minnesota's defense faced a total of 23 passing plays and 41 rushing plays. A total of 64 plays, which with the new clock rules and with a more NFL style of pace, it's a decent amount of plays, particularly on the ground with a physical running back like Amari and Hampton. And Minnesota's offense only had 55 plays. And the defense still stood strong. They held their ground. And they were able to hold North Carolina to 105 passing yards, 4.6 yards per pass attempt, and they even earned an interception. That interception was earned by Justin Wally, who returned it 70 yards, effectively flipping the field. North Carolina was driving. It looked like they were going to score, and they were already up 7-0. Wally picks off Johnson, returns it inside of the North Carolina 10, and 2 plays, 6 yards. Marcus Major punches it in for a touchdown. I mean, this defense kept Minnesota in a game that if just one touchdown play early happens, like if Wally doesn't make that pick or they get less pressure, or a few of the plays where they stuff Amari and Hampton, he busts tackles, the game could get out of hand and it could have been over by halftime or the third quarter. This defense is legit, for sure. The MVP of the game, just want to go over this quickly, is Noah Burnett. 1 of 1 on extra points, 4 of 4 on field goals, 13 total points, and had a long of over 50. I did not think that he would be this good because he was not as good as Kesich was last year, but he was the better kicker on Thursday night, and maybe he could be the better kicker throughout the season. It certainly would look like it when you see how Kesich shanked those field goal attempts. Meanwhile, Noah Burnett going 4 of 4, maintaining his poise on the road in an environment that was moderately loud, not like Ohio Stadium or Beaver Stadium or Michigan Stadium or Kinnick Stadium or even Memorial Stadium for Nebraska, but still a respectable environment that was, for the most part, full. And He was able to make kicks from long distance and really carry his team to victory. Good on Noah Burnett. Another player who I could have put up here, I think, would be Amarian Hampton. You could even put Connor Harrell up here because he executed that trick play that got North Carolina into field goal range to kick what would have been, or what was, the game-winning 45-yard field goal. It was a very nicely designed trick play, wide open, busted coverage, 6 plays, 48 yards, about 2 minutes. And then Minnesota had their own, what could have been, game-winning drive. Kesich just shanked a long field goal of anywhere in the 40s in terms of yardage. Next up, we have Michigan State escaping Florida Atlantic. What went on? What went on with the Spartans? That's a big question that I have for all of you, if you want to answer with a super chat. What went on with Michigan State? I wasn't at the game, but I watched it. Michigan State escapes Florida Atlantic, winning 16-10. They were up 16-0 at one point, and it looked like they could pull away and make it ugly, but they didn't. They let Florida Atlantic hang around, or maybe from a different angle, Florida Atlantic forced Michigan State to hang around in the bar, and it got ugly, and there were beer bottles and cans flying everywhere. There were scrapes, there were punches thrown, and it got ugly. It did. A 16-10 game between a Power 4 school and a Group of 5 school, especially when the Power 4 school's at home, is an ugly game. And it's not like Michigan State was totally incapable of moving the football, even though they did struggle mightily on offense. They had 3 turnovers. One of those turnovers was an interception thrown basically at the goal line that Florida Atlantic nearly returned for 6. They returned it for about 50, 60 yards, and then on a 40-yard, 3-minute drive and 7 plays, on a 4th and 1 nonetheless, they got a touchdown pass. And instead of Michigan State being ahead 23-3, they were only ahead 16-10, and they had to survive the whole 4th quarter with Joe Rossi's defense unexpectedly carrying Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren's offense. This was look, I'm not going to call it a disaster because Michigan State last year was a disaster and you knew that it was going to be a rebuild even this year. But I thought Michigan State would come out and at least with Florida Atlantic, bless me, mop the floor with them. They didn't. My score prediction was 45-10. I got the 10 part right for Florida Atlantic, but I was off by about 29 points on the Michigan State part, which actually makes, in my mind, Michigan State's defensive performance that much more impressive. I mean, they were able to hold Florida Atlantic to 2 of 5 on 4th down, 2 of 15 on 3rd down, 19 first downs, only 132 rushing yards and 116 passing yards. They forced turnovers from Florida Atlantic, along with getting sacks, pressure. Scotty Hazelton, as I said on Twitter, he should be in a holding cell. He should have a show cause so that no team in college football can hire him again. And Steve Sarkisian should fire him as an analyst right now. I have no clue why he's on staff. He horrifically mismanaged the talent that was on that defense. And while Michigan State received a plethora of transfers, you had players like Chris Bogle, like Angelo Gross, like Cal Halliday, like Alex Van Sumeren, and others like Malik Spencer, Ken Talley, that he had on his defense at one point, or even recruited and developed, and they did well. In one game in year 1 with defensive coordinator Joe Rossi, who I defended even when he had a bad year last season at Minnesota. Michigan State's problem is not the defense. It's not the special teams. I wouldn't even say it's the offense in terms of coaching and scheme. What it is the fact that Michigan State has a lot of newness on the offensive line. That's why Florida Atlantic was able to get a sack and 5 TFLs and hold Michigan State to, if you factor out the 63-yard rush, get 116 total yards that the Spartans did have on the Owls for, 36 carries? Yeah, 36 carries. FAU held Michigan State to about 3.2 yards per pop outside of that run, which is not terrible, again, given the newness and inexperience on the offensive line, but it's not great either. And Childs is new. The receivers, I said in the preseason, and I'm not always right when it comes to the preseason. Like, I'm wrong on some things. But I think I was correct when I said that the receivers were not the strong point of this team. Monterey Foster Jr., Alante Brown, Nick Marsh, Jack Velling, who's at tight end. Those are some good players, but especially with the wide receivers, there was a lot of miscommunication that I don't think was Child's fault. These receivers are young, they're inexperienced, their ceilings are not necessarily high, I would say again, outside of Nick Marsh, and Florida Atlantic did a better job of stopping the pass than they did the run. And really, the problem on offense for MSU is the scheme. This is a complex, I would say pro style, maybe pro spread, not exactly my expertise in terms of diagnosing schemes, but this is not a one read simplified spread. That's not what this is. This is a complex offense where they'll line up in the I form. They will use a player as a fullback. They will draw up complex plays and attack you deep or short or medium, or run the quarterback, or run up the middle, run on the outside, in between. They'll do whatever they can to win. And Jonathan Smith is a good coach. He's also an offensive mastermind along with Brian Lindgren. The scheme will take time to implement. And I think you'll see Michigan State's offense get better as the year goes on. The tough thing, of course, is Maryland is up next, and that's a road game, and Maryland looked very impressive, especially with Billy Edwards in their offense, which I thought would take a step back against UConn. Again, it's UConn, and UConn was not good last year or the year before under Jim Mora, but we'll have to see. Right now, Michigan State is an underdog in that game. The defense for Florida Atlantic played okay. Again, a sack, 5 TFLs, and only reason I didn't put they played well or they played good is I don't know who Michigan State's offense is or what they are. They could be, as I've said, a team that has some potential on that side of the ball, but it'll just take time for the scheme to work itself in, or they could be genuinely this bad. So I don't exactly know, and I'm just going to leave that up to you and my own thoughts to determine that right now. We don't have a lot of evidence for that, especially with, look, the over 60 new players on this roster. We don't have that right now. But I can tell you that them having 2 interceptions, especially one at the goal line, them having a fumble recovery by Jaden Williams, and them getting a few TFLs, a pass defended, and a sack on the road is a solid performance in my mind by the defense, and holding Michigan State to under 5 yards per pass attempt, and without that K'Ron Lynch-Adams 63-yard run under 4 yards per run attempt is pretty admirable and pretty impressive. But that's about where the talk about Florida Atlantic stops, because their quarterback Cam Fancher was atrocious, had a 9.4 passer rating. He literally was Deacon Hill with legs. That's what Cam Fancher was. And also this annoyingly long, awkward slide ritual that he would do whenever he tried to get down. Michigan State, as I said earlier, has a lot to improve on. The defense I thought was great. I do think it is going to be a legitimate unit in Big Ten play, and I think you'll see that. Could it be as good as Tony White's defense was last year at Nebraska, where White comes in to a busted defense that was awful the year prior and immediately turns it into a top 25, top 20 unit? We'll have to see. I certainly think that Rossi's capable of that, and I would say this defense is definitely top 50 right now. And again, it's Florida Atlantic, but I don't think that's much of an overreaction, given that the offense was bad, constantly put the defense in bad positions, in bad spots, poor field position, and the defense still clutched up and did their job. But the offense, I'm just telling you, 3 turnovers, not even 300 yards. Aiden Childs did not look good. 2 picks, no touchdowns, only a 30.7 QBR, constantly overthrowing guys, miscommunications galore. We'll just have to see, really. I hope that he improves. I hope that he gets better, and this is coming from a Michigan fan. But that was a rough opening for an offense that I thought was going to have one of its easier challenges of the 2024 season, because Michigan State, they have Oregon, they have Michigan, they have Ohio State, they have Iowa, they even have Rutgers, and Maryland on the road in week 2. That looks like a challenge right now. So there's a lot to improve on, but there are bright spots to look at. Like K'Ron Lynch-Adams had 9 carries for 101 yards, and that means you even take out a 63-yard run, it's about 38 carries or 38 yards on 8 carries. That's not too bad either. That's a little over 4 yards per pop. He was more consistent than Nate Carter, who got the bulk of the carries at 19, but only had 48 yards and averaged 2.5 yards per carry. He had a little bit of a rough night on Friday. Childs had 28 rushing yards and a very impressive 14-yard rushing touchdown where he looked really good and elusive. And the defense had 7 sacks, 10 tackles for loss, a pass defended, and 2 interceptions. They were covering pretty good. Again, it is Florida Atlantic, and Cam Fancher's not a good QB, but Michigan State was covering well, in my mind. And for that, I think that's great news, because defense has not been Michigan State's strong suit ever since 2019. And some would say 2018, because that 2019 defense was a big step off from that elite national title caliber 2018 defense that Mark D'Antonio and Mike Tressel fielded. The MVP for this game on Michigan State's side of the ball is defensive end Chris Bogle. Bogle had 5 total tackles, 1.5 sacks, 2.5 tackles for loss. He was impressive, and it was huge that he returned, and you can see why that is now. Jordan Turner also had a sack, same with incoming transfer Wk1 Deuce. Turner was also an incoming transfer. Ed Woods, incoming transfer, had a sack. And Ken Talley was a transfer that I think Michigan State and Mel Tucker took in before the 2022 season, like right in that August-September window. He couldn't play in 2022, but they took him from Penn State. He looked good in the limited amount of time that he got. This defense, I'm telling you, especially the defensive line, who lost Simeon Barrow and Derek Harmon, they're good. And if Michigan State was somehow able to keep Derek Harmon and Simeon Barrow, who knows how good this defensive line and overall defensive front with linebackers Jordan Turner, Cal Halliday, Jordan Hall, who knows how good they could be. I mean, this defense, as I've said for years, has talent. Scotty Hazelton just horrifically mismanaged it. Now you have Joe Rossi, who has worked at Minnesota with talent that resides outside of the top 50 in terms of average roster talent. And now he comes to Michigan State, who has top 40, maybe top 30 roster talent, and he can do stuff because he knows how to work with limited talent, and he knows how to develop and scheme well. And really, that's that. I think Michigan State is a good team defensively. Offensively, you still see the errors and the poor recruiting and development that Jay Johnson and the Mel Tucker regime gave Jonathan Smith. You also see how complex his offense is and that it's taking time to work things in. But I think they'll improve everywhere and be a better team still compared to last season. You may not see it in record. I want to caution you. They could be 4-8 again, but they'll be a better 4-8 team than they were last year, and there will be hope entering 2025 and beyond. I got to take a really quick break, guys. I'm sorry. My nose is running, so just sit really tight. I'm going to insert an ad in here just because, well, I'm going to be gone for about a minute, and it will take about a minute to run. I'll be right back, guys. See you soon. Thank you very much for your patience. We are back. So what I want to get into now that we're back is Penn State, West Virginia. And I want this to be very brief because I already made a preview and prediction video on this. So this is going to be less about in its entirety reacting to this game. And you'll see this also with Michigan, Fresno State, which I'm going to do a further breakdown on in the next few minutes. I just want to talk about a little bit of overreactions, what to make of this game in the long term. That's really where I want to go on this, because I already made the short-term angle, which is Penn State just obliterated West Virginia. But what about the long-term angle? I want to make a change of pace, really. What do we make of Penn State's victory over West Virginia? How does it make you feel for the long term? Again, West Virginia was not a top 25 team, certainly not a top 10 team. But Penn State did win 34-12, and I think they won this game in a more efficient fashion than they did against West Virginia last year, and that was with home field advantage. And Penn State's home field advantage is closer to a touchdown than the typical Vegas field goal that's handed out to teams for playing at home. So that's, I would say, close to a 10-point swing going from playing in Beaver Stadium as Penn State to playing on the road in Morgantown, and they won by about the same. I think it's pretty clear that this Penn State team certainly has more potential and more juice than last year's Penn State team. But that's just a what if. What do you think? Comment down below, and also make sure to like, subscribe, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts in the live chat, and also down below when this is released as a clip. But I look here at Penn State and how Ohio State was sluggish against Akron for a half, how Michigan through 3 quarters looked sluggish, how Oregon was just... I'm going to do a breakdown on that Monday. We're not even going to talk about that today to a large degree, because that deserves me observing that film and really dissecting it and just seeing what happened, because I think it was a little flukish, but I don't know, because when Idaho stops you twice on 4th down and you struggle to run all game, I don't know if that's much of a fluke, but we'll have to see. With the 3 teams who were viewed as being in Penn State's tier struggling to a certain degree, and Penn State was a little sluggish coming out of the gate, but through the final 3 quarters, it was clear, especially the second quarter, and I would say the 4th quarter and parts of the 3rd quarter after they, got playing and warmed up after that, 2-hour-long weather delay. It was clear to me that this team has explosiveness on offense. Their defense is still just as good, and they had the best game in the Big Ten by a mile yesterday. Make no mistake about that. They played West Virginia and housed them in their own stadium. They outscored them 34-12. They won by 22 points. They averaged well over 10 yards per pass attempt, well over 5 yards per run attempt. They had 457 total yards, 21 first downs, won the TOP battle, albeit slightly. They were 1 of 1 on 4th down, 5 of 11 on 3rd down, about, at the end of the day, completing 50% of their combined 3rd and 4th downs. It's pretty impressive, pretty good. And I look at the Nittany Lions and what they did, and you can even see it on ESPN's FPI. They right now are only 0.9 points behind Ohio State in FPI power rankings. Right now, they're currently favored to beat Ohio State per FPI, and they're favored to win all of their games. Like, technically, if you take whoever is above 50% and round up their total to 100%, Penn State has the best chance out of any team in the Big Ten right now to go undefeated. The best chance in the entire Big Ten. They're given about a 13.1% chance. The next closest team's Ohio State with a 10.7% chance. and then everyone else is under 2, a 2% chance. I think that Penn State could be the best team in the Big Ten. That would be my overreaction after week 1, is that Penn State's the best team in the Big Ten and that it may not even be close. Now that is bold, and that's why I say it's an overreaction. That's not necessarily my belief. I would still, given James Franklin's resume in big games and the fact that Ohio State has a lot of talent to work with, and they're adjusting and working through things too, with a newish wide receiver room, new quarterback, new play caller, etc., that they'll improve as the year goes on. And they have a better head coach in my mind, more consistent history, better talent, better development. So we'll have to see. But my overreaction from week 1 is that, especially with that home field advantage against Ohio State, with uncertainty about USC and Wisconsin not looking so good, this team is going to own their schedule. They are going to destroy most teams that they play in conference or non-conference play. And as of right now, they could be better than Ohio State. If you look at ESPN's efficiency metrics, which only care about actual in-game performances, like they don't care about priors or talent or coaching power rankings, they only care about how teams do in the here and now. Penn State's the best team in the Big Ten. Now also then Maryland and Purdue are some of the better teams in the Big Ten per that metric. And that's why, same with FPI, you have to wait for these power rankings to take into account multiple sample sizes and multiple games. But Penn State had a very impressive performance. I want to quickly talk about, I think, a strength and weakness that this team has. I want to start off with the bad. We'll finish off with the good. I think if there's one area to improve on for the Nittany Lions, in fact, it's an area that I know they can improve on, is consistency. They were, again, 5 of 11 on third down conversions, and all of their scores, all of them, were plays of 10 yards or more. And all but one of their scores, no, all but 2 of their scores were of 20 yards or more. 2 of them were of 40 yards or more. This team was explosive against West Virginia. Now, they were explosive against West Virginia to a certain degree last year, particularly in the passing game. But West Virginia improved, I would say, on defense. On offense, I think that's yet to be seen. But on defense, especially the secondary, I do think they improved compared to last year. Drew Aller and his receivers were playing in a hostile environment. Keandre Lambert-Smith was gone. He was, he's playing at Auburn now. And I didn't see too much of Julian Fleming Saturday. In fact, he didn't even record a single reception. But Harrison Wallace went off. 5 receptions, 117 yards, 23.4 yards per reception, 2 touchdowns. Amari Evans had a long reception of 55 yards. They were consistently explosive. But what they were inconsistent in is just getting the yards when they needed them. And that won't be a problem against anyone, I think, except Ohio State. But Penn State, with all they bring back, you expect to beat Ohio State. You want to beat Ohio State. You should beat Ohio State with home field advantage and all that Penn State brings back. And the fact that Kotelnicki, I think, has clearly resurrected this offense to a certain degree. I don't exactly know if they have a weakness outside of being inconsistent. And again, this was game 1 where they're installing a new system. They're on the road against a West Virginia team who is treating this like their Super Bowl, and they put up 34 points. And if this game was played tomorrow, I'd take Penn State to put up even more points than 34, because that first quarter was Penn State getting through all of their jitters, and then they went off and did pretty well throughout the rest of the game. I think James Franklin totally backed away, let Kotelnicki do his thing, and that's why you see this team being strong on offense, not just defense and special teams. I know that Penn State technically missed a field goal, but Riley Thompson is a good punter. He averaged 44 yards per punt. He had one inside the 20. And Sander Sehadek, I think, continued with his kicking struggles last year where he missed 2 against West Virginia, missed another one today, but he was 4 of 4 on extra points. And Penn State also had some kick returns, primarily with Nicholas Singleton, who averaged nearly 20 yards per kick return, which isn't bad whatsoever. this team overall is one of the best teams in college football. Their strength is obviously the defensive line and linebacker rooms. It's that front six, front seven that Penn State likes to play with. But I think their rushing offense has been resurrected as a strength as well. They ran for 222 yards, 5.3 yards per carry, and they had a rushing touchdown. Singleton at along a 40. He, as the game went on, began to carve up that West Virginia defense, who was consciously stacking the box and trying as hard as they could to make Penn State beat them through the air, which they did. And Katron Allen had an off game. 10 carries, 20 yards, 2 yards per carry against a West Virginia rushing defense that's probably average, improved from last year, but not good. I think he'll bounce back and have better games in the future. Aller had 44 rushing yards. Perbula had 25 rushing yards. And West Virginia did not record a single sack and only 2 tackles for loss. That's impressive. That is very impressive. I heard a lot of people say that, West Virginia is going to get pressure. They're going to stop the run. Penn State was inconsistent on the ground early because they were trying to get Katron Allen going. I think he started off as their running back, one or certainly tied with Singleton. But Singleton, with his performance, solidified that he is the better back, which is an area that I was wrong in. I thought Katron Allen was going to be the better back after last year, where he was clearly the better player for Penn State, and in 2022, where in the big games he did better than Singleton. I don't think Singleton is a big play merchant anymore. I think he can be more than that. And if he is, he could be the nation's best running back. That combined with a quarterback in Drew Aller, who's 11 of 17 for 216, 3 touchdowns, who is second in QBR right now, who looked far more aware in the pocket and more comfortable and more accurate than any time he did last year, and now knows his arm strength and knows his talents and limitations. This Penn State team's deadly, I'm telling you. And if not for the fact that I, along with probably many of you, have questions about James Franklin, I would say this team is like up there in terms of competing for a national championship. With their performance against West Virginia, especially in the second quarter, if James Franklin just had a better reputation in big games, I'd probably rank this team number 3, only behind Alabama and Georgia. And speaking of rankings, make sure especially to click that notification bell so that you can get notified when I release my updated top 25 power rankings. That's coming to you all on Tuesday, September 3rd. I want to move on to Nebraska. We'll talk about the Cornhuskers very briefly. And I know that I've taken a little longer than I planned, per usual, but USC LSU's not until 7:30. We'll get done well before then, I promise. This will be very brief, but I wanted to touch on Nebraska because I gave a prediction for this game, and it was 38-0. Nebraska, after letting up a touchdown and it being a tied 7-7 game sometime in the second quarter, they stomped the rest of the way and won 40-7. This team is dominant. This team can run the ball. They finally have a quarterback who's competent and true freshman Dylan Raiola. I'm impressed with how he played. 19 of 27, 238 yards, 2 touchdowns. They had a 59-yard touchdown pass, a 21-yard touchdown pass. And the Cornhuskers, they didn't have very many explosive runs, though Dante Dowdle did have a 42-yard run. They averaged nearly 5 yards per carry, 4.7 yards per carry to be specific, and 223 rushing yards on nearly 50 carries. Nebraska had 83 plays. 83 plays. Now, UTEP only had 50, but still, the fact that they allowed UTEP to have 50 plays and they put 83 of their own shows that Nebraska will pick up whatever yardage they need. And they were 0 of 2 on fourth down, and they scored 40 points and won by 33. And 30 of those points were in the first half. 37 of them were in 3 quarters. They obviously slowed down and were willing to rotate guys, bringing in Heinrich Harburg at quarterback, who did well, even in bringing Jalen Gramstan, I think incoming transfer for them. And they had Ramir Johnson, Dante Dowdle, Emmett Johnson, Gabe Irvin Jr. They had Maurice Mezcua. They had over 5 running backs take snaps. So Matt Rule And Marcus Satterfield and Tony White are just trying as hard as they can to get players experience. And they'll do that for many of these games in September and October before things get rough late mid-October, and obviously for their 3-4 games in the month of November. They stomped the Miners, destroyed them. Pardon me. And Nebraska looked very good. And I will tell you right now the same thing that I said on Twitter. This team should destroy Colorado. And I think they will win that game. I'll say that here and now. I think they will win. I think they'll win big. You'll have to wait for my prediction and analysis on that one. But I'm telling you right now, what Nebraska will do to Colorado, I think should be similar to what Wisconsin did to Michigan back in 2019, where Wisconsin ran for a bajillion yards, they passed well too, and they took Colorado out, or they took Michigan out, rather. I think Nebraska very easily could do that to Colorado. We'll have to see. For that game, like, subscribe, share it around, click the notification bell. Just do those few things. For that game, I'm going to be going live, but on my Patreon page and also for YouTube members, if I can do both of those. So that is why I stress those things. I think the Huskers are ready for a big year. I really do. I easily see 9-3, 10-2 at this current moment. I think their ceiling is no longer 10-2. I would rather say that their ceiling is 11-1. That's what I would think their ceiling is at this current moment. And thank you, Bald Father Betts, for the $50 super chat. I will get to that at the end. And I will also reply to your email very shortly. And we'll figure something out there on a positive note. So thank you for those things. But I see a big year for Nebraska. I really do. And 11-1 is possible because Iowa's Iowa. I'd still favor the Hawkeyes right now, but Nebraska could win that game. And Wisconsin, who I picked to beat Nebraska, I wouldn't pick Wisconsin to beat Nebraska at home right now with how they looked against Western Michigan. And it's not like they have to look over to Alabama because they don't play Alabama for like 2 weeks. Maybe they were, though, because now they have South Dakota. So it would be smart for them to overlook Western Michigan and South Dakota if it means they get like a full month's worth of preparation for Alabama. Maybe that's what Luke Fickell and Wisconsin have going on. I know they do have talent, but when Western Michigan is leading you in the fourth quarter, I have to take that for what it is to a certain degree. And finally, I want to talk, not finally, but second to last, I want to talk about Ohio State versus Akron. Ohio State against Akron is intriguing because I'm going to keep it short and I'm going to keep it sweet. Ohio State beat Akron 52-6, but there are things to work on. That's basically what I'm going to say. Because 52 points is what Ohio State should score against Akron, but the majority of those should come earlier rather than later. Ohio State only scored 17 points in the first half, and they even had a turnover inside of the red zone against Akron, or close to inside the red zone in the second quarter. Akron held them to a field goal. And if not for Jeremiah Smith, with how Ohio State's other receivers were doing and how Akron's defense was doing, Ohio State may have only been up 10, or they may have been tied 3-3 at the half. This offensive line still has a lot to be desired of. Akron didn't have any TFLs. They only had 5 passes defended, but it's hard to get TFLs when you have Quinshaw Judkins, the ultimate power back who has shiftiness, and also Travion Henderson, who is like an epic big play merchant, and I don't even mean that in a bad way. He'll fall forward and get you yards as is to a limited degree. And the O-line, maybe I'm being too harsh here, but Ohio State needs to do better, and they need to be more consistent if they want to win it all, and if they want to have a guaranteed victory over Michigan and Oregon and Penn State. The reason I may be harsher on Ohio State than some of these other teams is their expectations are the highest in the country, probably tied with Georgia's and Alabama's right now, and they could be higher than both of those. You had Urban Meyer and Jim Tressel say in the preseason that this is the best team they ever saw. This is not the best Ohio State team I've ever seen. By how this Ohio State team looked against Akron, they're probably not better than the Ohio State teams of the previous two seasons, the 2022 team and the 2023 team. We'll have to see. Howard made some really good throws. He had some misses. He's an upgrade over Kyle McCord because he has about the same passing capability as Kyle McCord from what I watched, but he can run. And he does a pretty good job at running. They used some QB power. He scrambled a little bit. And again, Ohio State didn't surrender a single sack or TFL. That's not just on the O-line, and credit to them there for pass pro. I thought their pass pro looked better than their run blocking. That's also on Will Howard. Will Howard's a good QB. He didn't have his best game, but again, it's game one in a new system, in a team that's built different than Kansas State, mostly for better, but I would say in some areas for worse as well. You don't have the same tight end play. I look at the Buckeyes, and I think that they just can't be sluggish. You can't come out that way. And they did it all last year, where they were a second half team, very slow in the first half, and they pulled away against the small, medium, and near elite opponents. But against the elite like Michigan, they got game controlled to death. Remember that. Michigan was 3 of 3 on fourth down. What did we see in this game? Akron was 2 of 3 on fourth down, and they were the most successful in short yardage. They even occasionally converted some third downs. They were able to respectfully run the ball. Not extremely well, but Ben Finley took a ton of... Ohio State had 5 sacks. 5 sacks. If you don't adjust for sacks, Akron didn't do a great or even good job at running, but it's just enough to where you think that Penn State, and if Michigan's offensive line improves and if Oregon's offensive line improves, they could just consistently get 4, 3, or 5 yards per pop, convert fourth and shorts, and keep Ohio State's defense on the field the whole game. And again, as I said earlier, I'm only being this harsh because I think still they're the best team in the Big Ten right now. They should be the best team in the Big Ten. Ryan Day is an elite head coach who made some moves this preseason that say he doesn't think what he's done is good enough. And this game against Akron, all I can really take away is that this Ohio State team is a near elite team, which is what they have been every year under Day. So I don't know that much. All I can tell you is their receivers are good, their running backs are some of the best in the country, their run blocking still needs some serious work in my mind to be a high-level offensive line, but they look a little better than last year. Receivers, there's a drop-off there, but Jeremiah Smith looks good, and with time they'll improve. The defense is still fairly conservative. They can get pressure. We'll have to see how they do against stronger teams on that. But ultimately, they're better at defending the pass than they are at stopping the run. That's all I can tell you, and that's basically what they were last year. Better at pass defense and pass offense than they were at run offense and run defense. So there's not much to say there other than the fact that this team is, well, a near elite to elite team. And that's about it. So take from that what you will. Ohio State gets a win. They do a little less than I thought they should have done. But when I criticize them, I'm not saying they're a bad team. I'm just saying this team wants to, crush Michigan, win the Big Ten, and beat Georgia. You're not beating Georgia from what I see right now. And the Big Ten, Michigan and Oregon looked pretty sluggish. Ohio State looked sluggish for a half. And Penn State had the most efficient game by a mile out of those 4 teams. So we'll just have to wait and see. I don't have an overreaction for Ohio State. All I can tell you is, as of right now, they look like a team that is overall at a similar caliber to what they were last season. We'll see if they improve over time. And now I want to talk about Michigan and talk about them in the same way that I talked about West Virginia and Penn State. What can you take away from this game. What do you make of 30-10? What do you make of Michigan only leading Fresno State 16-10 in the fourth quarter? What do you make of it? Fresno State straight up challenged Michigan. They did. And it was ugly. They held Michigan to about 2 yards per carry for 3 quarters. They were able to pass on Michigan consistently at times, though at the end of the day, they threw more interceptions than touchdowns. And they just... Michigan was favored by, look, about 20 points, 20 and a half points, maybe 21 points. And Fresno State was within striking distance up until that fourth quarter. So that's really my question when I look at the Wolverines is, who is Michigan? We know they're elite defensively. We know that they have a capability of running the ball. We know that their defense, again, will be one of the best in the country. We know that their special teams is good because Dominic Svado went 3 of 3 and 2 of 2 on field goals of 50 yards. But quarterback's a huge, humongous question. It's a big question. Who's better between Alex Orji and Davis Warren? And is Donovan Edwards a feature back for Michigan, or is he what he has been for the previous 3 seasons? You mix him in, try and get some explosive plays, and see what happens. Is Kalel Mullings running back number 1? Who steps up at receiver for Michigan? There are many questions. I mean, did Michigan hold back their entire offense so that they can beat Texas next week? Or is this truly Michigan and Texas is going to beat them like 45-10? I don't know. I'll have to watch how Texas played, and maybe I'll have to rewatch how Michigan did. But even factoring in Michigan looking ahead to Texas and having a lot of change, this was a disappointing performance by the Michigan Wolverines. I want to pose the question, first and foremost, of who do you think should start at quarterback? Davis Warren last night went 15 of 25 for 118 yards, averaged about 4.7 yards per pass attempt. Threw a touchdown to Colston Loveland, also threw a pick to the opposing defense. He had a 33 QBR. And his passer rating was a striking 104.8. Pretty bad passer rating. He started his career as a walk-on. He's experienced, clearly has a low ceiling, but his floor is probably a little higher than Orji's. Compare that with Alex Orji, who went 1 of 2 for 3 yards and a touchdown, a QBR of 89, a passer rating of 227.6, but you can't take much from that because he only had 2 passing attempts. The bigger takeaway for Orji is he had 5 carries for 32 yards and averaged 6.4 yards per carry with a long run of 11. And the fact that I think with him, the offense looked better, but that's just my opinion. With Warren, the staff clearly trusts him more. That's why he was in there, and that's why he got to pass for 25 times, despite barely completing over 50% of his passes, only completing exactly 60% of his passes, and having a Spencer Petras type passer rating, and really Spencer Petras type game. Michigan offensively looked a lot like Iowa last night. Toward the end of the game, they ran well. They finished with 148 rushing yards, 4.4 yards per carry, and they only had a long run of 21. So toward the end of the game, they were consistently running for 4, 5, 6 yards per pop. And if the O-line can stay that way, and through the rest of their games on average only allow, 1 or no sacks, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe against some of the better teams, 6 TFLs, Michigan will have a pretty good run game with what they have at running back and with how they'll mix in Alex Orji. But is this enough against the big teams? And who really is the better quarterback? Because I get the feeling that from a passing angle, Warren is certainly more consistent, but Michigan needs to look with what they have at quarterback and receiver and decide, do we want to be balanced like we were last year? Do we want to run the offense that Kirk Campbell wants to run? He's more of a pass-heavy guy. Or do we want to go back to what Sharon Moore knows best? Do we want to ground and pound, scheme it out that way, and really run a spread option and just occasionally passing the ball with screens or quick passes to Colston Loveland or slant routes and occasional play action to keep teams honest while we run and rely on our defense and special teams to win us games? I don't exactly know the answer, but I can tell you right now, I do think Orji is the best quarterback. I do. He had 32 rushing yards, and he improved the offense. When they rotated him in more often in the fourth quarter, and part of me thinks in doing so, he may start against Texas because they rotated him in more as the game went on. The offense improved with him, especially the rushing offense. I feel like the offensive line is more confident with him than with Davis Warren, because with Davis Warren, you pressure him, he's only going to throw it away or escape. You pressure Alex Orji, he can make you pay, as we saw in the spring game where he performed respectably well against one of the best defenses in the country. I think the O-line, I think the team, the players are more comfortable with Orji. They believe in Orji more, or maybe they don't, and ultimately it's just the fact that he is better suited for Michigan's current roster. Either or, I think he's the better quarterback, and I think Michigan needs to start him if they want to maximize their chances to win, especially, and again, I have not watched Texas versus Colorado State film yet, but I suspect that he is a quarterback who would do much better against Texas than Davis Warren would, because I do think that with Texas losing their two interior defensive tackles, a secondary that still may have some questions to it, and with Texas not having the same ground game they did last year, Alex Orji will give Michigan a better chance to establish game control and target any potential weaknesses that Texas has in stopping the run. So I think that for week 2, and really for the rest of the season, that Orji should start at quarterback and that he is the best Michigan has to offer. But we will see if I'm correct on that, or even if the staff considers starting him over Davis Warren. Thank you guys so much for watching the stream. I know that but LSU versus USC starts in about 10 minutes, so I'll get off here right now after our Super Chats. Thank you for the $20 from Justin Ziegler, and again the $50 from Bald Father Bets. I am going to quickly answer these, and then we'll get to our game. USC versus LSU. I will not be live for that. Just wanted to make sure because I didn't want to insinuate anything. But I'll be live next week for Texas versus Michigan. I'll be live. I'll do play-by-play. I'll have the roster sheets all in front of me, sitting in this exact location. And with my 65-inch TV that I got for cheap from Best Buy, we'll watch it together, and I'll call the game. And I think that should be very fun. And I will also do Nebraska versus Colorado, like I already said here, but that will be on the Patreon page, and I'm also going to try and roll out YouTube memberships this week. So I'm going to try to have it both on YouTube for members only and also Patreon, but make sure to sign up as an All-American or Heisman member to get that access to that stream. Make sure to do that if you want to see Nebraska versus Colorado live. And you can sign up via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Or that'll be, of course, sorry to confuse myself, but that'll be the case when this video is no longer live, because my pinned comment's currently something else. But anyway, let's get to the Super Chats. Bald Father Bets, thank you for the $50 Super Chat. Any chance Orji is the actual starter, and this is just a chess move from Moore? Would be crazy risk given Orji could have used the snaps to gain experience. I don't see how they would win with a walk-on. At minimum, Orji has to play more. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think that, and I said this before Michigan even played Fresno State. When my friend told me Warren is starting, I'm like, oh, we're not beating Texas then. Or my faith that we will is certainly tested, and he'll have to have an amazing game against Fresno State to prove me otherwise. He didn't. He did not. He again had a Deacon Hill Cade McNamara at Iowa or against Washington in 2021, Spencer Petras, Graham Mertz stat line. And it was against Fresno State, who has a good defense, but good, not great. Texas, with all their weaknesses and questions, if you take a look at their defense and expand it out to the FBS and not just Power 4, Texas has a great defense, potential to have a near elite defense. And their offense is much better than Fresno State's. I mean, they got Quinn Ewers, they got Matthew Golden, Silas Bolden. I know that you know this, Baldfather Betts, as you're a Texas fan, but you, like others may not know this, they have legitimate tight ends, receivers, and O-line. I don't care that their running back room is decimated. They have the passing offense and the potential on defense to force Michigan to be one-dimensional, and eventually their offense will break Michigan's defense. I mean, this is what happens when a more balanced team with a great offense meets up with an Iowa-type team that has an elite defense but a limited offense. They eventually break them. Let me see any of your other chats. If Michigan has to throw 25-plus times against Texas, yeah, that could get ugly unless, like you said, it's a pure chess move. And I don't think that's the case because insiders have been saying that Warren is the best quarterback, the most consistent quarterback. I don't think that was a chess move. I don't. Now, if it was, that's like one of the best chess moves in college football that I've ever seen. I do think Michigan was hiding things against Texas, both offensively and defensively. I think a prime example of that is the fact that after Fresno State scored a touchdown, Michigan effortlessly went down the field. And I think they did that because they didn't want to take a risk of losing. But even playing bland, really with how they did at the offensive line and how Donovan Edwards performed, even playing bland, it was disappointing and concerning. I just think that Texas's strengths and weaknesses on defense say you should play Orji. Yeah, exactly. Because, look, they no longer have Sweat and Murphy. And that's no disrespect to Alfred Collins, who I think is really good. But they don't have the same depth there. They don't have Bo Davis anymore. Texas's D-line, from what they have done in the portal and what they have returned, is probably better built now for pass defense than run defense, which was the opposite last year. With Orji, who will scramble anywhere, and with designed runs is going to be pretty good on the outside, and Michigan has good tight ends and a good enough O-line to where they'll block, I think, well, anywhere. They should improve off of this performance against Fresno State. I think you got to start Orji. And I think Michigan's plan against Texas, initially, I could be wrong here, initially it should be mixing a little bit of pass, but see if you can do to Texas what you did to Penn State last year. And that will require Michigan's defense to also play a very good game and keep Ewers in that passing offense in check. But try it, because if Michigan can run on Texas and control the clock and force Texas to be one-dimensional through the air, that at least gives Michigan a chance to win this game. And I think that's probably Michigan's path to victory, given that Ewers has had inconsistency in the past, in the passing offense. Like, look at Washington last year against a defense that was subpar in a lot of aspects. He started off horrifically in the first half. If not for that, they could have won the game. You look at the fact that they don't have C.J. Baxter, and I hope that he is healthier. Please pray for him, guys, that he gets healthy. Same with their fourth-string running back who's injured. That could handicap them a little bit because Michigan's run defense is no joke. Their D-line, linebackers, and their DBs, I think, if given time, can be some of the best in the country. I would say right now that I don't know who I would pick. I still think, by the way, that schematically the matchup slightly tilts Michigan, but roster-wise and Week 1 performance-wise, Texas. I would take Texas right now, I would say, as the better overall team in power rankings. And they're certainly the more diverse team. They have the more balanced roster, and they have the more returning production, especially at a position like quarterback that's so important. And also offensive line, where they return a lot more than Michigan does. So a preview and prediction will be out for that this week, very early. Baldfather Betts, again, thank you for the $50 super chat. I appreciate that from you very much. Tonight, I will get back to your email that you did send me. Check out his channel, guys. He does cover a lot of spread stuff, and he has just started out his channel. But check it out. It is intriguing stuff. I was listening to his episode that he released today, and it is interesting how he bounces around and covers all these different games and players. Yeah, check out his channel. And lastly, he says that has to be the plan for Michigan. Get it into the fourth quarter and then pull out a win. If it's 14-0 Texas at any point, it will be hard for them to come back from behind. Exactly. If it's 14-0 Texas, the only hope for Michigan is to score before the half, make it 14-7, and then if they can get the ball from start a second half, make it closer from there. But, yeah, I mean, Michigan gets behind by double digits with what they displayed against Fresno State. It'll get ugly. And as much as I believe Michigan is hiding a lot for Texas, and they're still a top 10 team, especially with all the struggles that other good teams had in week 1, Texas looked better from the stat sheet, from the score. I'm 99% sure they'll look better in game film. And even with home field advantage, you got to start Orji. The defense in the secondary will have to play lights out because they're facing an elite wide receiver group. And that's my brief analysis on this game. Is Michigan, because of what they've done in the trenches historically, but even from a standard of proof on that D-line and how they looked on O-line in the fourth quarter when they had to score and when Orji was in, I still think they have a matchup advantage and a path to win. But Texas is more talented. Texas has the more proven quarterback in O-line, so more proven roster, the more proven head coach, and they're the more balanced team. Those are massive advantages that negate the fact that Michigan might be able to control the advantage, the trenches. And that's a big if, a big might. I appreciate you coming on and donating the $50. Let's get to Justin Ziegler, and then we'll close out this video. Hey, Sam, yesterday all I can think of is that the Big Ten has concerns. Even Penn State has some concerns about run defense, and Aller reminds me of Carson Wentz. Make of that what you will. Seems like an auto SEC in the playoffs now. I think you mean SEC winning it all. Well, that's been my opinion since the beginning of the season. The difference is I think Texas probably has a much better chance of winning it all than I thought of previously because A&M and Michigan looked worse than I expect. Georgia even looked a little bit inferior offensively compared to what I expected. So you never know. I think at this point, Georgia and Alabama are the two best teams in college football. Texas, Ole Miss, Missouri, I think are top 10 teams right now. They all could be top 6. I think Ole Miss and Texas may have the high octane enough to be top 5. Oregon looked like garbage against Idaho. And I'll do a brief video independently of live streams on that game tomorrow. Michigan did not look good against Fresno State for 3 quarters. Ohio State looked sluggish for 2 quarters. And they had, I think, 2 defensive scores, multiple turnovers forced. Their offense had a bit of inconsistencies. And Penn State, I don't exactly know what to make of what you said about Carson Wentz, because I don't watch a lot of the NFL. But what I will say is they spoon-fed him throws. He only threw 17 times. And their run offense, it took a while to get started. I disagree with you that I disagree with you about the run defense being a concern. I think that's very strong. But that's about all I'll disagree with you on. I do think that they have concerns about consistency, about Drew Aller. We still don't know if he's near elite, or just great or good. I think he's improved, but again, we don't know. I do think that it's Georgia or Alabama right now winning it all. I have a hard time, though it's possible. I think Oregon can win it all. I think Ohio State can. I think even Penn State and Michigan can from the Big Ten. But their percentages are dwindling, especially Michigan's and Oregon's. And Penn State's, I was never extremely high with their shot to win it all to begin with because of Franklin. But their numbers are dwindling. Texas's rose, and Alabama's and Georgia's certainly did as well. And lastly, Zarar Shahid, I like your take on Michigan State a lot. Thank you, by the way, for the $5 super chat. The offense will be ironed out through sheer experience. Childs looks like an 18-year-old in his first start. He'll improve. I agree with that. I think Michigan State will get better as the year goes on in offense. With defense, we'll have to see, but I'd expect the same thing. I think Michigan State will give Maryland a tougher fight than some people believe, but will they win or lose? You'll have to watch my preview and prediction video to get the read on that. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys very soon. Let's get to watching LSU USC, and I will be active on Twitter for that game. If you want to follow my Twitter, as I know many of you are still on here, and I love that we've built an awesome community that's just consistently here, you can check out my page here at twitter.com/college/CFB with Sam. Right here. Copy this link or click it, and that's my Twitter account. Just go and follow it if you can. I would appreciate that a lot. And Justin Ziegler said Carson Wentz, a lot of talent and makes those amazing plays, but then makes a lot of bad plays back-to-back. In short, inconsistency. Okay, I get what you're saying, and I completely agree with that. Yes, Aller was more consistent yesterday than he has been in the past, but he still had some inconsistency. And when you only throw 17 passes, you can make anyone look good, especially when you have an OC like Andy Kotelnicki. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all very soon.